Is this some kind of joke? The young woman behind the front desk sneered. Sir, we don't accept fake gift cards. The lobby fell silent. Conversations stopped. Heads turned. A tall black man in a black hoodie and matching baseball cap stood across the marble counter, holding out a gold-embossed Evermont gift card. His voice didn't rise. He didn't flinch. He simply blinked. It's not fake, he said calmly. It was a gift. You can scan it. The receptionist, Tina, scoffed. She didn't even touch the scanner. We don't have time for this, she said. Louder now. Please step aside. We serve real guests. Behind her, a manager leaned on the wall, arms folded, smirking like it was just another day. From the lobby lounge, seated in a quiet corner beneath the chandelier's dim light, a man in a worn denim jacket and navy baseball cap slowly looked up. No one gave him a second glance, just another middle-aged traveler with tired eyes and a travel bag slung over his shoulder. But what no one realized was that he owned the entire hotel. Richard Whitmore, the 55-year-old founder and CEO of Evermont Hotels, sat frozen. He hadn't planned to interfere. He was only here to observe, undercover, to see the truth of how his brand treated everyday people when no one was watching. But this wasn't just poor service. This was something else. His eyes locked on the man in the hoodie, dignified, silent, humiliated in front of strangers, not for something he did, but for what he looked like. And Richard knew, in that moment, this would not end quietly. This would end with truth. And everyone watching would shut up. Richard Whitmore hadn't worn a suit in weeks. These days, it was denim, worn-out boots, and a cap that shaded his face more than the chandeliers ever could. That was how he preferred it when he walked into one of his hotels, not as a CEO, but as a shadow. He didn't need to be seen. He needed to see. Evermont Hotels was his life's work. Built from scratch, no trust fund. No boardroom inheritance. Just grit, vision, and years of working. Every job from valet to night janitor. The brand was supposed to mean something. It was supposed to feel like home for anyone who walked through the doors. But lately, he'd felt something slipping. There were complaints, subtle ones. Whispers about staff brushing off certain guests. Patterns no report could prove. But Richard could feel them. And today, he wanted to know the truth, unfiltered, without titles, without filters, without press-ready smiles. That's why he booked himself into the New York Evermont flagship, using a fake name. No one knew, not even the regional manager. He'd been sitting in that leather chair for 20 minutes already, sipping on bad coffee, pretending to scroll through his phone while scanning everything, the staff, the service, the smiles. But nothing hit him harder than what had just unfolded at the front desk. That man, Malik, the name he quietly caught from the check-in system, had done everything right. Polite, patient, gift card valid, clearly branded Evermont Gold Tier. And still, the staff dismissed him like a scammer. Richard clenched his jaw. It wasn't about one bad employee. It was about the rot that sets in when leaders look away, when image overtakes integrity. And in this moment, he made a decision. No more watching. He stood up slowly, adjusting his baseball cap, the heart already pounding, not from nerves, but from fury. This hotel was his house, and someone just slammed the door in a guest's face. Malik didn't argue. He didn't shout, didn't bang his fist on the counter, didn't demand to speak to anyone. That's what surprised Richard most. He just stood there, gift card still in hand. His shoulders square, but his head slightly bowed, not in defeat, but in something colder. Familiarity. Like he'd been here before. Too many times. Tina gave him a tight-lipped smile. The kind that didn't reach her eyes. "Sir, please don't make this more difficult." Her voice was now sharp enough to draw attention from across the lobby. A couple checking in turned to look. A bellhop slowed his pace. But no one said a word. Only Malik spoke. Calm and direct. "Could you just scan it? That's all I ask. You don't even have to check me in. Just scan it." He placed the card gently on the counter. Tina didn't move. Instead, she turned to her colleague at the back office and muttered under her breath, "Security. Maybe." That's when Richard's heart sank. He watched the concierge, Chelsea. He'd seen her helping guests earlier exchange a worried glance with Malik. But she didn't step forward. Her hands fidgeted near her blazer pockets. She looked torn, silent, and from the hallway behind the front desk, a new voice entered the scene. Firm, loud, careless. What seems to be the problem? It was David, the floor manager, late 30s, confident swagger. Perfecte knot. Malik stepped back slightly, eyeing him cautiously. Tina immediately handed the problem off. He's refusing to leave and trying to use a card that doesn't work. David didn't ask questions. He didn't look at the system. He didn't even glance at the card. He just turned to Malik and said, "We've had issues with these lately. If you don't have a proper booking or a working card, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." No eye contact. No empathy. Just dismissal. Richard's hands tightened around the armrest of the leather lounge chair. This wasn't ignorance anymore. This was arrogance. And the worst part, Malik didn't flinch. He just smiled. Softly. Sadly. "I see. I guess some places haven't changed at all." And with that, he tucked the card back into his jacket pocket and turned to leave. But Richard had already stood up. He wasn't going to let this end like that. Not in his hotel. Not in his name. Richard moved with calm intention. No loud footsteps. No commands. Just a slow, deliberate approach from the far end of the lobby. Denim jacket. Baseball cap pulled low. Travel bag slung over one shoulder. To anyone watching, he looked like another middle-aged tourist who had just seen too much. But the moment he reached the front desk, the energy shifted. Tina stiffened. David straightened his spine and offered a polite smile. "Can I help you?" "Sire," David asked, his voice switching to customer mode. Richard ignored him. Instead, he turned to Malik, who was now just a few feet from the exit. "Excuse me." "Sire," Richard said, voice even and clear. "Do you still have that gift card?" Malik blinked, surprised by the question, but nodded slowly and pulled it back out of his jacket. Richard reached for it with steady hands, examining the card front and back. Gold tier, issued by Evermont Corporate. Not a single scratch on the strip. He said loud enough for the lobby to hear. Then, to Tina, "Why didn't you scan it?" Tina faltered. It looked off. "We've had some fake ones lately. I just didn't want to waste time." "Waste time," Richard repeated. As if tasting the words, David stepped in quickly. "I'm sure it was just a misunderstanding. These things happen. We're all a little stretched this week." Richard looked him dead in the eye. "You're the floor manager." "Right." David nodded, suddenly unsure. Richard smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Then you know there's a policy for these cards. Scan first." Verify second. Escalate third. Not the other way around. The silence in the lobby grew heavier. Tina's mouth parted slightly, as if to speak, but she said nothing. Richard handed the card back to Malik with a nod of respect. Mind if I scan this myself? He walked behind the counter like he belonged there. Because he did. And as he slid the card into the terminal, it beeped once clear. Green. Accepted. Valid. Malik didn't smile. He just nodded like a man who'd already expected that result. Richard turned back to the staff. You both owe this gentleman an apology. David shifted awkwardly. Tina's face flushed with red. But neither of them moved. And that's when Richard took off his cap. Gray streaks in his hair. Steady. Piercing eyes. Chelsea's concierge gasped first. Then David's face drained of color. Because suddenly they knew. They weren't speaking to a guest anymore. They were speaking to the founder. The cap hit the counter with a soft thud. For a second, no one moved. Not Tina. Not David. Not the guest nearby pretending not to stare. Even the bellhop paused, mid-step. Richard Whitmore stood tall, now no longer hiding behind the disguise. No longer playing a part. Just the man who built this place. Brick by brick. Principle by principle. David's voice cracked. First, Mr. Whitmore, sir. We had no idea you were. I know you didn't. Richard said, and that's exactly why I came. He turned to the terminal, pulled up the check-in system with a few practiced keystrokes, then rotated the screen so both David and Tina could see. Gift card. Verified. Fully funded. Corporate issue. And Malik here was completely within policy to redeem it without deposit. Without credit card. Without any delay. Tina shrank behind the counter. David took a half step back. David began. You were just trying to profile him. Richard interrupted. His voice low but thunderous. You looked at what he wore. Where he stood. What he looked like. And you made a call. He turned so everyone in the lobby could hear. Let me be clear. This hotel does not operate on assumptions. We operate on service, on respect, on dignity. The words hung in the air like weight. Chelsea finally stepped forward, voice trembling. Sir, I wanted to say something. Two-side. But Richard stopped her gently with a glance and a nod. And you will, but not to me. You'll say it to our guest. Malik still hadn't moved. He stood quietly, one hand in his jacket pocket, the other holding the validated card, his expression unreadable. Richard looked back to Tina. Apologize. Tina opened her mouth, stammered, then looked to David, who said nothing. She turned back to Malik. I'm sorry, she said weakly. Richard raised a brow. Like you mean it. Tina swallowed. Mr. Malik, I'm deeply sorry for how I treated you. I made a snap judgment. And it was wrong. You didn't deserve that. No one does. This time, Malik nodded, still calm, still composed. David added his own apology, stiff and rehearsed. But Richard didn't care for the performance. He cared that everyone saw it. He turned to the lobby. Let this be clear to every employee and every guest. This company does not tolerate discrimination. We don't guess who belongs here. We don't judge wallets by skin color. Not in my hotels. Not ever. The room was silent. And then, a few guests began to clap hesitantly at first. Then louder. A woman at the bar stood up. One of the porters wiped a tear and nodded. Malik simply tucked the card away again, and Richard gave him a small nodone of respect. One that said, "This isn't over." It was only the beginning. The applause faded. And then came the silence, the kind that weighs heavy on the walls. Richard stepped away from the front desk. Jaw tight. Fists unclenched only by force. He didn't speak to David or Tina again. He didn't need to. They weren't just embarrassed. They were exposed. He turned to Chelsea, who looked both grateful and shaken. "Make sure, mister. Malik is offered the best suite we have. No charge. Full comp. And escort him personally. Don't hand it off." She nodded immediately and moved with purpose. As she approached, Malik looked at her not with suspicion, but curiosity. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I should have said something sooner." Malik gave a small, knowing smile. "You did now. That matters." They walked toward the elevator, side by side. Behind them, Richard tapped into his phone and sent a 3-word text to his operations chief. "Start internal audit." Then he made a call. "HR. Suspend David's access. Begin investigation. I want a full employee conduct review for this property within 48 hours. Yes. You can quote me." He hung up, then stepped outside into the cold December air. The city buzzed around him, cabs, conversations, Christmas lights blinking in the windows. But Richard wasn't distracted. This wasn't just one incident. This was a crack in the foundation of something he built to be different. And he had let it fester too long. For years, Evermont had sold itself on a brand of luxury with soul. But soul meant nothing without accountability. He lit a cigarette. Something he hadn't done in 10 years. Just one drag. Then he flicked it into the gutter and whispered to himself. Never again. Upstairs. In the suite Chelsea had led him to, Malik stood by the window, looking out over the city skyline. He didn't unpack. He didn't sit. He just stood. Because deep down, he wasn't really a guest. He was watching. Waiting. And now, he had seen enough to decide whether this man, this company, deserved what was coming next. Richard didn't sleep that night. He sat alone in a corner office on the 30th floor, where he could look down at the glowing lights of his own empire. His jacket was draped over the chair, his laptop open but untouched. Instead, he read old staff reports line by line. Buried in the numbers were truths he had ignored. Guest complaints filed and never escalated. Staff turnover in urban locations. A pattern he didn't want to admit, even to himself. "We've been polite on paper," he muttered, "and poisoned in practice." The next morning, his executive team arrived in hushed waves. Some had heard whispers of what happened. Most assumed it was minor. A mistake. Something PR could patch over. Until they saw Richard's face. Until they saw the footage. He played iTunes Interrupted for his top managers, VPs, and regional directors. The full recording from the lobby camera, Malik's calm, Tina's attitude, David's dismissal, his own entrance. When the clip ended, no one spoke. Richard finally looked up. If this happened to someone like Malik, calm, respectful, compliant, then what happens when it's someone without composure or without proof? A long silence. Then he continued. "We built Evermont to stand for dignity, but we let assumption become policy. That ends now." He laid out sweeping reforms, mandatory bias training, front desk, restructuring, anonymous guest incident reporting lines, and a leadership reshuffle. No one protested, because they saw the storm coming. But what they didn't know was that the storm had already stepped back into the building that afternoon. Just past 3 p.m. The elevator chimed in the boardroom hall. A man in a charcoal gray blazer, clean black dress shirt, and polished Oxfords stepped out. No hoodie, no baseball cap. But Richard recognized him instantly. So did the others. Malik. He walked into the room like he'd built it himself. Calm, collected, confident. He nodded once at Richard. I believe you asked for a meeting, Malik said, and every executive in that room suddenly understood. This wasn't just a guest. This was a man about to decide whether to invest $50 million into Evermont's global expansion, and he had come to see if they were worth it. Malik didn't sit right away. He walked the length of the boardroom slowly, eyes scanning the faces at the table VPs, department heads, even the legal team. Every one of them now fully aware that the man they dismissed yesterday was the same man holding the keys to their company's future today. Then, without asking, he placed a sleek black folder on the center of the table. That's the deal. I was prepared to sign, he said. 50 million. International expansion into the UAE and North Africa. I had a team ready to move by next quarter. He paused, then looked directly at Richard. And last night, I almost walked away from all of it. The room held its breath. Richard leaned forward, hands clasped. But he didn't speak. Malik turned toward the giant window that overlooked the skyline, same view from the suite he'd been given. I came here unannounced for a reason. I've been investing in hospitality chains for the last 10 years. And what I look for isn't just branding. It's culture. How your people behave when no one's watching. He turned back to face them all. What I saw yesterday wasn't surprising. That's the saddest part. It was predictable. And that's your problem. One executive opened his mouth to interject, but Malik raised a hand, calm but firm. You don't fix this with apologies. You fix this with accountability. He stepped closer to Richard now, his tone steady, personal. I don't doubt your intentions. I believe you care. I watched you stand up, call it out, and take responsibility in front of strangers. That mattered. But if this company's going to take my money and my name as a partner, then I have one condition. Everyone leaned in. You launch a program not for PR, not for headlines but real. A leadership pipeline for Black and brown talent in your hotels. A mentorship initiative that brings more diverse faces behind that front desk. And in management. And beyond. He paused, then added, and I want it named after someone. Richard raised an eyebrow. Who? Malik smiled faintly. My mother. She worked 3 jobs. Cleaned hotel bathrooms for 20 years. And never once got asked if she wanted more. I want the next generation to be asked. Silence. Then Richard stood, walked around the table, and extended his hand. Then we'll build it. Together. Starting now. They shook hands not as guest and CEO, but as partners. And the boardroom, for the first time that day, exhaled. The press release dropped at noon. Evermont Hotels announces $50 million. Partnership with Malik Rowe, ventures to launch global expansion and diversity leadership initiative. Within hours. It was everywhere. Business outlets, travel blogs, LinkedIn feeds. But what made it viral wasn't just the money. It was the mission. The Rowe Williams Initiative, named after Malik's mother, would become the first nationwide hotel mentorship program built to elevate marginalized voices into leadership, starting from the lobby to the boardroom. A quiet storm swept through Evermont's executive corridors. And by the next morning, the fallout arrived at the front desk. Richard stood in front of the staff, team no suit. No press. No podium. Just him. Tina and David were there too, summoned for a private meeting they had hoped to avoid. This isn't just disciplinary, Richard said calmly. This is cultural surgery. David fidgeted. Tina looked like she hadn't slept. We're not here to clean up what happened. Richard continued. We're here to learn from it and remove what allowed it. He handed them each a sealed HR file. David opened his and went pale. Termination for cause. Tina's read. Suspension with mandatory retraining and probationary return. She looked up, stunned. Why am I not fired? Richard didn't flinch. Because you've never been told anything else. But now you will be, and what you do next will be your real test. He turned to David. But you were in charge. You had authority, and you abused it. David opened his mouth, but Richard cut him off. There's no seat for you here anymore. 2 security officers escorted him from the room, not publicly, but deliberately. No drama, just consequence. As the door closed, Richard turned back to the remaining staff. This is a new era. One where what you do when you think no one's watching defines you. And this brand, he looked at Tina. You've got a second chance. Not many get one. Use it. Tina nodded slowly. No defiance, left only reflection. That afternoon, every Evermont property received an internal directive, bias accountability modules, front desk empathy training, and the first recruitment wave for the Roe Williams initiative. And in the hallway, Malik stood watching, not gloating, just making sure it really happened. When Richard walked out and joined him, they shared a look. You didn't just write a check. Richard said, neither did you. Malik replied, 3 months later, the lobby looked different. Not the marble floors or the chandeliers, those were the same, but something deeper had changed. The air was warmer. The greetings were real. The glances longer, more thoughtful. The walls didn't just reflect light, they reflected growth. The first class of Roe Williams mentees had arrived. Young people from Harlem, Oakland, Atlanta. Newark fresh-pressed suits and nerves in their smiles. They were paired with GMs, mentors, and a pathway forward. One of them, a shy girl named Jordan, adjusted her name tag and whispered to her mentor, I didn't think places like this were for people like me. Richard overheard. He didn't interrupt. He just smiled quietly from across the lobby. Heart a little fuller than it had been in years. Upstairs, the conference room doors swung open. Malik stood at the head of the table, reviewing expansion plans for Evermont Dubai with Richard and the board. But the vibe wasn't corporate, it was collaborative, grounded, equal. At the end of the meeting, as people filtered out, Malik stayed behind. He pulled something from his pocket, the original gift card. Still gold. Still perfect. He placed it on the table between them. I'm framing this, he said, not as a reminder of what went wrong, but of what you chose to make right. Richard picked it up, turning it in his hand. He looked at Malik. You saved us. Malik shrugged. You saved yourself. I just gave you a reason to try. They walked out of the boardroom side by side. Down in the lobby, Chelsanau, promoted to guest experience director, stood with Tina, helping her train a new hire. Tina's tone was different, softer. She asked questions now instead of giving orders. She listened. When Richard passed by, she looked up. He nodded, and for the first time she smiled back. Not the trained kind. The real kind. Outside the hotel, a bellhop opened the door as Malik stepped into a waiting car. Have a good evening. See ya, he said. Malik looked back at the hotel behind him, the empire that almost lost its soul, and found it again. I already am. The car pulled away into the New York dusk, and above the hotel's gold-lettered sign, a new placard had just been installed. Home is for everyone.